So Temple, why don't we start and check in and let me know what's going on. What's going on in your world? How are you doing?
You know, Temple Hayes is doing great. You know, I'm doing wonderful. I feel like I just keep reemphasizing time and time again that, you know, this is the reason we're here. This is the most exciting time that I feel I've ever been on the planet. And such a purpose, you know, for all of us. And I guess the other part I would add to elaborate is that to remind myself and everyone that we are the ones that called this in. And so, in other words, you know, at 2020 and everybody were using these glorified mantras of 2020 and vision and new worlds and new this and new that. Well, babes, here you are. So let's remember that we called this in, we invoked this in, we invoked a radical change. And so we want to remember that. And the other part that I would just like to highlight, because it, you know, I've been able to tie in the idea of the last words of George Floyd, God bless him, and just a horrific way he died. And that is 6 shows, of course. But the fact of I can't breathe, and then the fact that people are dying of COVID because of lung related issues. And so there's all that, and I can see the metaphysics of, you know, COVID and things. But when it comes to Black Lives Matter, I was telling our group yesterday that, you know, when I first started going into the silence, and my shaman told me that that was going to be part of my growth, was going into the silence, it was overwhelmingly a sense of anxiousness, like, oh my God, I haven't stopped talking since my mouth was wired together in my 30s. How could I go without talking? And yet then I succumbed to like weekends of quiet and silence. But what I observed, you guys, is that after I had been on a weekend retreat, I couldn't go out in the world of activity. I had to change my flight plans or my retreat plans, because I couldn't leave that retreat of silence and then go to a wild airport and get in a plane. I just felt like, oh my gosh, I can't handle this. It was so overwhelming. And yet that's the way my life had been all the time previously. And what I feel, instead of saying, well, it's been one thing after another, you know, we've had COVID and now we have racism in our society. To me, they're connected. They're greatly connected, because the entire world, not just a city, but the world was invited to take a sacred time in, to quarantine, to quiet down so much of the activity. And then these things happen with Aubrey and Breonna and now George Floyd. And we are so ultra sensitive that, to me, that's the grace. It's like, we are done with this, never again. It has reached all people from all walks of life, all colors, all national, everything. People are going, we've had it. But I do feel that we were positioned perfectly for it spiritually, because we had relaxed out on so many things that it was like front and center. I'm not saying that it wouldn't have created a stir. I'm just not convinced it would have created a stir of this magnitude had we not been so prepped for it as a society. And I'm certainly saddened about the 100,000 people that have died, but I'm definitely saddened about the millions and millions of Black people that have died for no reason because they're Black. So, you know, yes, that's kind of my check-in with that, of just where I'm at.
Wow, I love that, Temple, of course, because that's what I have been reflecting on too. I think two avenues to go down. One is that everything that's happening in our country and in the world this week was preceded by this, for some of us, not for all of us, but almost like a forced silence, right?
Yep.
So we haven't been as distracted. So something like this event happens with George Floyd, and then we're all awake enough to notice what's really happening.
Mhm.
Other thing I wanted to speak to, because you talked about, we've seen the memes like, I'm going to return you 2020, no thank you 2020, right? We're writing off the whole year. But what I know to be true, and what I'm hearing you saying is that spiritually, this is what's needed to happen.
Yeah.
My
Mhm.
own journey, as painful as it was, I needed to do the deeper shadow work. Now all that meant for me was all the beliefs, biases, ideas, the core false beliefs I was holding about myself in the world, that I had spent a good 20 years learning how to very, very skillfully bury all of that. No,
Yeah.
I'm not looking. No, I'm not looking. No, I'm not looking. There was a time in my recovery, in my life, in my spiritual evolution, where that needed to come up. And for me, it was in the fetal position. I remember one time being in the fetal position on my floor. It felt like for hours sobbing, because
Mhm.
that had to come up for a healing.
Yeah.
So, I talked yesterday to Gabi Bay Area, and I said, I want to be careful to say, I'm not saying either or, I'm saying both and, right?
Mhm.
So, yes, it's happening because right now the shadow that has been part of American culture, that is racism and racial biases, are coming up to the surface for the healing. That and it's okay to be angry, it's okay to be sad, it's okay to be frustrated, it's okay to be confused. We get to use that as fuel for the transformation. And it's been said so many times, this is not new. What's new is the technology to record it. Right now,
Right.
we're seeing it all. I mean, I've known this.
Right.
I grew up in a very, very racist culture, and I remember hearing all of this racism coming at me, and it was so painful. That's a whole other conversation that, I hope we'll get into. But for now, what I want to say is uh, both, I can see how we could call this horrific and this is terrible that it's happening. And it is time for us as spiritual beings, as conscious beings, to have the sacred no and the sacred yes. No, we're not going to stand for this anymore. We're going to stand for peace. We're going to stand for actually healing this instead of putting band-aids on this big wound that has been with us for hundreds of years.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Since when it was 1619, wasn't it, or something like that, that it's just been put under the rug. But yeah, I feel that, like you're saying, I mean, I know early on when I first started doing the shamanic work, that would be what that much silence would do to me, is that it would get me into a place of feeling such levels of emotions and being sober to feel it. I mean, the fallacy about being sober is you had problems because you drank. First it was you have problems, so you have permission to drink. Then you realize, oh, I'm going to stop drinking, I won't have problems. And then you realize phase 3 is you have as many problems as anybody else, you just feel them. but all that said, I feel that that's part of it too. Is this time it wasn't a news report. This time we had been so calm, or our lives have changed, or we're more vulnerable, or we're in the midst of a change. And so this time we felt the person's pain. We felt a human being begging for life. We felt all of that. We felt his parents' pain. Though they weren't living, we felt the children's pain. We felt the siblings' pain. We felt the community's pain. And we felt our own pain, like, oh my God, this time we are not going to walk back from this. And I know years ago, I didn't mean what I understand now it sounded like it meant. I have been, since 2007, I wrote a little book for kids called The Right to Be You. And it was all living things matter, because I'm also about all sentient beings matter. And so inclusive in this book, of course, was no matter the color of your skin, you deserve to have your dreams come true, and you can love who you want to as a gay advocate, and then animals have the right to be, please leave them alone, all of that. So back then, I mean, I've been advocating for my sisters and brothers. I was one of the 2 Caucasian women on a military base. Okay. So my Black sisters and brothers, they've been family to me. I don't just say posters because they're popular. I really mean it. I mean it with all my heart. But I can see now, you know, years ago, TJ and Jeremy, when they would say, well, Black Lives Matter. And I go, yes, all lives matter. And I didn't mean you don't matter. And I'm not saying you don't matter. I was saying, let's aim as high as we possibly can. Let's just cover everything right now, because nobody should ever die from violence or police brutality or from somebody else, just a civilian killing you or whatever. But now I get it. You know, I get how that must be. You know, it's like somebody dies in somebody's family, and you walk up to them and say, I know how you feel. Oh, thank you for sharing. No, you don't, you know? So I understand that now, and I won't ever do that again, because I have an awareness about that. But the reason I did it was not about that. So for me, it's like, let's go further than even Black Lives Matter. Let's say Black Lives Matter to me. You know, because I think that's going to be where the deeper work comes in too, because it's like understanding it's been wrong, and it has been wrong forever, what's been going on. But deeper than Black Lives Matter, yes, they do. But do Black Lives matter to you? You know, and I had a 91-year-old speaking yesterday. And he served he's a Caucasian man. He served in a Black church in New York when he lived there. He's a very dear friend of mine. But he's like, you know, if you want to do something right now, you know, ask yourself, I mean, how many Black friends do you have?
Right.
You know, how many Black doctors do you have? You know, and I said, me being me, I went, and how many Black people have you slept with? Been married to? That would be me twice, you know? So it's like, you know, it's that kind of thing that it's more, there's ways that just ordinary people, if they don't want to get involved in council things and city things and, you know, all those things as a citizen, they can make new friends.
Mm.
One thing I'm really curious about that you both kind of touched on is, you know, the fact or the correlation between the shelter in place, COVID-19, and kind of this, you know, we're collectively in the stillness and the silence, and then we see things really boiling over. And so I'm just curious, you know, with both of you and your experience, I know for a lot of people on social media, a lot of people in my network have been looking at ways they can do their own healing, because that is a big part of the movement, I think, is recognizing the narratives that you have about racism, about who we are culturally, about how we work together. And so I'm wondering from a spiritual perspective, TJ, maybe you could lead with, what does that healing look like for someone who's not really invested much time or effort into that inner work yet?
Wow. Well, thank you, Jeremy. I'm really happy you asked that, because I think that is, as Temple said, the deeper work. The deeper work for me personally, is that I wanted to compartmentalize and say that I didn't have any racism, or I didn't have any racist thoughts. And then there was a point in my evolution when I realized that that was just simply not true, because I was born into this world a whole and perfect being. We're not born with biases and racism and sexism and homophobia. We are taught that, right? We are taught to hate. You know, that I'm not the first person to say that, but we can also unlearn that. But what I want to start with in this conversation that I think is really important is, yes, I came into this world as a whole and perfect being filled with love and light. And I also grew up in the 1970s in Indiana, and there was a lot of racism around me. And it would be inauthentic at best for me to deny that some of that was absorbed by my personality self, right? So I spent probably the first 20 years or so of my life fighting against it because it was easier to point fingers at someone else and look at the horrors of racism and how dare you. And there was a point in my life when I had to recognize, wow, what are my unconscious beliefs, biases, and ideas? Am I actually aware of what those are? Now, this is true about any topic, any topic. But right now, what we're talking about is this idea of racial inequality, racial bias, and racism. I had a very, very racist grandfather. He used to just say incredibly racist things. And I remember going to my room and crying when I was at his house because it was horrible for me to hear it. And I had to also acknowledge, or I'm acknowledging more now, that I also, some of that must have seeped in because I didn't think he was evil. I loved him. And that was very conflicting for me. So the deeper healing for me is to recognize that this is not about fixing someone or something outside of myself. This is about gently and lovingly taking a mirror and honestly looking at what if any, which for me, of course, because we're born in America, and as we've already established, that bias has been here for hundreds of years. I'm absorbing that consciousness, and it's my responsibility, because the spiritual journey for me is twofold. One, developing an intimate relationship with our true nature, spending time in the silence, as Temple said, cultivating that relationship with that place within me that's unharmed and unharmable. The second part of the spiritual journey for me is questioning and unlearning just about everything I've been taught that's counter to this truth. And that includes racism. And what I want to say is that racism is playing small. You know, Michael Beckwith, our common friend Michael Beckwith, says, in order to break the agreements we've made with mediocrity, we must become intimate with our true nature. Well, mediocrity, status quo, is looking at people as us and them and good and bad and different, less than because of the color of their skin, better than. And I have had to have an honest conversation with myself and say, what are those biases? What are those beliefs that I might not even be aware of? My husband is mixed race. He's half Black. And we had a conversation the other night. And I noticed myself getting defensive. Well, and he noticed me getting defensive too. And he lovingly said, honey, you're getting really defensive. Let's explore. Wow, what a gift. Because I noticed myself tightening and reacting and pushing back. Now, I didn't say a word, but there was something that got touched. So I'm grateful for that, as painful as it was. Wow, there's something there for me to look at. The individual healing work is the greatest gift we can offer the planet, because otherwise we're just blaming and pointing and trying to get Donald Trump to change. Good luck with that, right? I can start with me, and that doesn't mean I don't do things in the world, but it has to start with me checking in with my own core ideas, biases, and assumptions and healing that. Otherwise, as I said, we're just putting a Band-Aid on a much bigger issue.
Mm-hmm. Temple, what do you think?
Yeah, one of the things that's been coming up to me over the last few days is to not change the subject. You know, don't change the subject. It's like we as people, we tend to do that. I don't think we do it on purpose. I'm going to take a stand for Black Lives Matter, but you know, I just refuse to believe that all the cops in the world are bad. And you know, who's going to protect them? And they're not really bad people. There's just a 1% bad. And so we've gotten off subject. You know, it's like, and there's no comparison, and I don't want to get off subject either, but I'm wanting to make a point. So it's like, you know, it's like the woman coming to see me in my office, and, you know, and she's got bruises on her face and on her leg. And I'm saying, I'm getting ready to call and report this. Your husband's beating you. And she goes, yeah, but he's a really nice guy. You know, it's like, oh my God. So for me, it's like, let's don't change the subject. I mean, let's all get real on Black Lives Matter. Why did they matter? What matters? And I do think that it's evolutionary, because I do think at another time, in only the world I see, people ask me, what do I feel about the world? I can only talk about the world that I see through my own filters. I'm not a world spokesperson. I'm not up in the sky looking down at all aspects of the world to give a real clear assessment of that. But in the world I see, I have known times when people were willing, white people were willing to talk about issues with Black and our issues, and we couldn't do it right. You know, we would upset the Black people because we weren't doing it appropriately. And I get that now too. So my point number one would be, don't change the conversation. That would be crucial. Don't change the conversation. Stick with Black Lives Matter. Why do you feel comfortable with that? Why do you feel uncomfortable with that? What do you feel like you can do? There's always something you can do. You can go to council meetings. You can look at the redlining in your own neighborhood. You can look at how whites have an average of $100. A Black person has $5.20-something. You can study about systemic racism. There's no excuse to not know what you can know. That would be a key point. The other is to have relationships, you know, and to be engaged in that way. And it's like I compared it with being different as being gay. And I thought, I'm wanting to let you know that I understand what it's like to not be accepted. But see, that doesn't work either, because I could hide as a gay person. I could hide. I could put on a different hat. I could put on a different coat. I could be with a different group. And nobody had to know I was gay, because I might get killed from doing that. Or an officer could have killed me in the low country of the Bible Belt. Are you kidding? I could have disappeared. They could have put me in the water. And yes, they did do that back then. But see, I could hide being gay or denying it. You can't deny the color of your skin. So that's, again, another way of changing the subject. So the point is, ask a Black person, what do you need? What do you need? What are you feeling? What can I do? I was with a group yesterday and I'm like, do I need to apologize about anything? Have I missed something? I want to do anything I can. You know, what can I do? And I think that's necessary. And because we all tend to attract new thoughters in our audience, I want to say, please stop saying just pray and meditate. Yes. You know, we do not teach people that prayer and meditation is all you got to do. No, we don't. We teach you that prayer and meditation helps you do what you need to do. But it's not passive, you know, any more than Arun Gandhi would say that just because you sit around and say you've never slapped somebody doesn't mean you're not a violent person. You're violent because you sit around and do nothing. Well, right?
Yeah, and I love you saying that, Temple, because that's what came up for me yesterday. And then, of course, I find out that this is what Michael Beckwith talked about yesterday. And there's one consciousness here. I think new thoughters, let's call them new thoughters, in the past have been straight to love and light, right? Let's just pray this. Let's just meditate this. Let's just look for the good. But that is what we call a spiritual bypass, or it can be, right? And so part of it, and I think this is where our movement is emerging into, we have to acknowledge that we also have this human incarnation. It's okay to be angry. Use that anger. We're not here to like express the anger and rage and just diffuse that. And I think that's the difference, right? When I vent, I release the anger, I might feel better, but it's not transformative. So the sadness, the confusion, all of the emotions are actually really useful. And that's what we're inviting here. Let's take new thought to the new level of yes, and yes, it is true that ultimately everything is love and light and that prayer and meditation works. What we're saying, though, is that is the starting point. Conscious being leads to conscious doing. And what right now we're called to action, and for me, inaction is no longer acceptable. The key for me, though, is starting with the consciousness and then taking it outward. Am I fighting against? What does that create? Or what am I standing for? And how can I actually make a difference in the world?
Yeah. And what are your inconsistencies? That's always something great to journal. What are your inconsistencies? I guarantee you throughout the nation yesterday, many new thought leaders started talking about it and may have even mentioned Black Lives Matter, but then they got all into unconditional love and all that kumbaya. And, bless you. But we've got to get, and we must stop using banners that reflect our spiritual centers. If it's all white people, it's not good promotion, so that's what I'm talking about. What are my inconsistencies? We have worked through the years intentionally to have Black board members, Black band members, Black sound team, AV, media members. That's intentional when you go from being all white to a mixed blended community. But it forced me years ago to look at, well, how is our mission statement says we are inclusive and diverse where? Mm-hmm. So I think those are the kind of things. And for those of you that are listening and you go, well, this isn't really for me. I don't really have a church. I don't have a center. Yes, you do. You have social media. Yes, you do. You have a tribe that listens to you every day of your life. Be so tuned in now. Is your imagery all white people? Do you use posters with white people? Do you use posters with mixed? Do you use, what is it that you're doing? Everything that you're doing is a statement about what you're voting on and what you're consistent about. I think it's hysterical as a citizen of the United States that a bunch of people elected the president because he was going to put up a wall, and his wall is around his house. That's just more than I can grasp, because I have come to realize, and I think it was Marianne, TJ, you didn't get to be on that call, and I'll fill you in later on this week if you want to give me a call. But, we don't want to forget that we are citizens. We have a right to talk. We're citizens. And I just find that hysterical that, he's all protected behind his little fence there in the white, very white house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Temple, actually, I'm really glad that you brought up, well, both of you spoke really well to one of the things I was really excited to talk to you about, and that is kind of the stigma of people in spirituality, right? And so, like, sometimes there are people in my network who give me a little bit of guff about the fact that I want to lead with my heart and, view things through a spiritual lens. And, and they're like, Jeremy, just get mad, dude. We've got to go fight. We got to go blah, and it's like, well, and then, as you go through social media, you see like, there are memes and videos and posts all directed to this or through this lens of, if you're not, then you are, right? And it's like this very either or, and it's polarizing and divisive. And I noticed for me, what I really have been working through is the fact that when I read something that says, if you haven't posted, you're part of the problem, I immediately become defensive, right? And that's something that I've been kind of exploring and asking, like, why haven't I posted, and what could they mean, and blah, blah, blah. But to me, I couldn't ask those questions and really be honest with myself if it weren't for a spiritual practice. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious then, as we're kind of navigating through the conversation on social media with our friends, how can we keep it calm? How can we keep it close to the ground and communicate in a really effective way without that stuff being so activating?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because it's very black and white thinking. And of course, that's, intentional that I said it that way, right? Us and them, good, bad, right, wrong. And what I'm really aware of for me is that I need to notice, as you said, Jeremy, so beautifully, I need to notice my internal response. Conversation I had with Will, my husband. I noticed the internal response, and then it was like, wow, look at that. Isn't that interesting? And I think what has happened for the most part in our culture is there's a discomfort with that. So then we externalize, right? And it's much easier for me to find a group of people to blame and to point toward and to create a meme about or to post at, right? We see this highly opinionated culture right now where, you know, you're wrong and I'm right, and let me tell you why. But if we would stop, right, and then going back to the mirror, you know, America does not need to build a wall. We need to build a mirror, but then actually look in it, right? Sounds great to say, yeah, we need to have a mirror, but, you know, most of the time, it's like, yes, we need to have a mirror. Okay, Jeremy, look in the mirror. Okay, Temple, look in the mirror. No, wait. Oh, it's for me. Oh, you mean me? Right? And so it's very, very personal in this way that, like, I need to take a look at what needs to be unlearned, what needs to be explored, what needs to be questioned within me. What is it about what someone just said that touched something within me? And this is what Michael's talking about when he's saying, don't vent that anger, use that anger. Now, what does that mean? If I just explode with my anger, and I understand the anger and the rage, I understand all of it. I even think it has a place right now. It must, because that's what's happening.
Yeah.
I have to also look at, there's power in that if I use that as actually a transformational energy, but it's really always going back to, like, what's happening internally, what is this reaction about, what is this response about, and then from there, as Temple said, then start building communities that are actually diverse. Start to ask those questions. How diverse is my life? How diverse is my industry? You know, and Jeremy, you and I can talk about that with our industry, and Temple, you and I can talk about that with New Thought, right? So it's really exploring these ideas and these concepts, but it's much more than ideas and concepts. It's really about reflecting what is really happening within me, what needs to be healed within me, because that, as I said before, that's the starting point.
I think too, Jeremy, what's coming up for me and just listening is that, you know, when you're in your 20s and 30s, or speaking from my 20s and 30s, I really thought I would get to a certain place spiritually that I felt no deep pain and no deep anger. And we do have some people that are very fake and very they talk really quiet like that, and it's all divine and perfect and wonderful and loving and sweet and harmonized and everything. But to be a real authentic person and to be in this space of evolution in these times, then what we come to understand is the more spiritual you identify yourself, the more intense feelings you have. So it's not like, well, I'm becoming spiritual and I'm hanging out with spiritual people, so I don't have that anymore, and I'm not that anymore, and I really can't do that anymore. No, you will find I have sat up all night because I read somewhere that they were slaughtering horses. I have sat up all night because of something somebody did to a kitten, or did to a Black person, or did to an Indian, or did to something. And I just go all over the place inside myself. And I don't want that to go away. I want to be angry. I say that to my community all the time. Really? You don't want to be angry when you see what that man did to his child? You don't want to be angry. You're going to sit and go, God's in charge, everything, you know, divine order. You know, no. You're going to be angry, but you can have both. And I think that's exactly what our brother was spot on, TJ, about of that black and white. It's not black and white, and it's not even gray. You know, it's all the colors of the rainbow, in that I am a proud, enlightened rebel. I am a rebel. What is going on is absolutely not okay. But I'm going to post, I am going to speak, and I am going to respond like MLK, like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, or Dr. Martin Luther King, whatever, however you want to refer to him. I am going to approach life just like that talk from that mountaintop, you know, from Washington. And that's why people get heard. That's why Mother Teresa was heard. That's why great orators are heard, is because, yeah, they're very angry. Oh God, yes. They risk their lives every day, and they're angry and they're pissed. but they present it in a way that the consciousness can handle it, you know, because it's like, that is what Martin Luther King Jr. said, darkness does not drive away darkness, only love can do that. But he didn't say just pretend there's no darkness.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I think that's kind of what you're seeking. And that's where you can see the work to do. You can still talk about things being so inappropriate, unacceptable. You just don't have to be slapping people when you talk about it, you know?
Right.
Is that helpful in any way?
Oh, absolutely. I think both of you really nailed it. And I think, you know, another piece that I've really been thinking with, you know, over the last week is, you know, in reading A New Earth and learning about ego and roles and the way we identify and, you know, we kind of decide who we are in thought, which I find really interesting, especially right now, because what I see when people argue on Facebook, generally speaking, I try not to get involved. But every once in a while I do. And I think one thing that I've really been with is that these roles that I've assumed, these characteristics of who I am that I've created with thought aren't really actually who I am. And at any moment I can decide that I'm not going to be that, or I'm not going to think that, or I'm not going to assume that role anymore. And I'm wondering if either of you have had experience with that, like that inner shift, because I think, you know, one of the real driving forces behind Black Lives Matter is trying to awaken people to the fact that that this stuff is really happening. And I think when we deliberately try to change someone's mind or perspective, it can get really messy really quick. And so what role have you guys seen the ego play in that? Kind of a big question, but.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. And thank you so much for that, Jeremy. And, you know, Eckhart Tolle also talks about the pain body. And that's what we're experiencing right now, right? People in a great amount of pain. And we are looking at it through the lens of identity. When I actually understand the deepest truth of who and what I am, I can witness my ego. And when I can witness my ego from that place of wholeness, I become less reactive and even non-reactive. And so the tricky part for me in that conversation is what Temple so beautifully said. And I'm so grateful that you have such an authentic way of just speaking to it, right? Because nothing is less attractive than an ego that believes it's spirit, right? And that's what Temple's talking about. It's like, oh, I'm love and light. Everything is beautiful. I'm enlightened, right? And that, if that's the ego talking, ooh, that's a tough one, right? Because then I'm not able to say, oh yeah, no, I'm really angry right now. No, I'm really hurt right now. No, I'm really confused right now. No, I'm really going through a deeply transformational process, which involves a lot of unearthing some crap that has been buried for 30, 40 years, right? So when I know that I am spirit, or when I understand my essential beingness, I get to witness the ego in a less reactive way. Now that happens individually, but then that happens collectively. So I'm not going to get as activated. My pain body is not going to get touched by what people are saying or doing. Course in Miracles says everything is love or a request for love. Right. So I used to believe that everything was love or fear. And I would say, oh, they're just afraid. That's why they're doing that. Oh, I'm just afraid. That's why I'm doing that. Well, that's great, but that's just a symptom. The request for love right now is please see me. Please hear me. Please recognize that I do matter. You know, when we go back to Black Lives Matter, one of the things that's really interesting, if someone does a breast cancer march, you don't have anyone saying, well, what about colon cancer? Why are you not looking at that? Or if your partner comes to you and says, honey, do you love me? And your response is, well, I love everybody.
Right.
So
right.
It's a good example.
Yeah.
There's something about that one that's touching something.
Mhm.
Believe it or not, I think I'm answering your question because that's my ego that's getting touched. you're touching something. Well, wait a minute. What about all lives matter? There's something getting touched. And if I'm unwilling to look at that ego response, I'm just going to keep perpetuating more and more pain in the world. And that's what we've seen for centuries. And there is a way to wake up from that, but it involves some really, really painful moments. At least it has for me, because there is joy and freedom on the other side of that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you know, the greatest healer, at least that's how I feel today still, the greatest healing agent in the world is validation. It's, you know, it's like we say in high school or in college, you are a valedictorian. You know, we ultimately are all valedictorians. We validate things in front of us and we give them power by validating them. I remember years ago, I had a major car accident. I'd had a few, but that's another talk. When we talk about our sobriety days, we could do quite a bit of entertaining with that, but we're not going to change the subject today. But that being said, I was in an immense amount of pain and I felt like I had a poison in my mouth. And I had like this one cord from my shoulders to my toes that pulsated all the time. And I was skinny as skinny could be and carried this chronic pain with me and, you know, and had like TMJ kind of things. But everywhere I would go, every specialist, and I went up and down the East Coast of Florida and they went, oh, that's not possible. You know, you couldn't have that. I mean, I went Eastern, Western, you name it, anything. And, just would get so frustrated because it's like, hey, I know my body, you know? And so one particular day I was referred to this place, Sanctuary Chiropractic. I won't ever forget it. I walk in and there's this doctor, acupuncturist, chiropractor guy, and he looks at me and he goes, I see what your problem is. You've got like a liquid fluid in your mouth, probably has a terrible taste, and you're pulsating all the way down. And I guarantee you, I mean, I think I could have left that day and not even done any work with him. It was, that's where we are. And again, it's nowhere near, it's just, we're talking the concept of it, not the experience of it. That, you know, that's what our Black brothers, sisters, neighbors, cousins, aunts, uncles, everybody needs, is to be validated that this racism, this systemic racism in our society, it is real. And we don't even need to just address the people that are killed that up till filming we never knew about. We need to address the people that have never been able to fully thrive, that are called stunted people, because the little kids, according to the taxes that were paid, are redlined in a certain neighborhood. So they only get certain opportunities. We don't know because of children's names, what job, they never even got a call back, even though they might be the smartest one. Somebody's sitting there going, oh, I don't want Black people, you know, to move in our neighborhood. I remember one time my neighbor got upset with me about something quite trivia. And he said, well, I'm thinking about putting the house on the market and I will just make sure that a whole bunch of Black people move in. And I went, that would be like my best day ever. I love Black people. That'd be great. You know? So anyway, it's just, yeah, I went on a flow there, but it's validation. Their pain matters. Their emotions matter. And the more we honor it, the more our nation will heal.
Beautifully said. Yeah. And I think, you know, I have seen, because like, I think we touched on it early on in the show where it's like, I just give 2020 back, or, you know, like this is the worst year and all this stuff. And there have been times where I'm like, yep, I agree, you know, where it's just the hardship after hardship and just, you know, it has felt very uneasy, I think, for months. And it has been challenging for me, at least. I don't want to speak for anybody else, but it has been a challenge to try and find comfort in the discomfort and know that while it does, when, you know, just I think it was the day before yesterday, there was a big shooting just 20 minutes north of me, and 2 cops were shot. One of them didn't make it. And this is, you know, 20 minutes up the road. And the guy, the perpetrator was in the military, active in the Air Force. you know, and it's like, oh my God, that was like right up the road. What is happening? And and I'm so uncomfortable with how much discomfort there is. And so I'm wondering if either of you have not tips or advice necessarily, but just words about that, or insight or reflection on kind of that discomfort that's with us right now.
Go ahead, TJ. Go ahead, TJ. My little dog wants to go outside, so I'm hearing, but I'm going to walk away for a second.
Okay, perfect. For me, it's very, very simple, Jeremy. It is that as long as I stay comfortable, nothing changes, right? As long as we as a culture stay comfortable, nothing changes. We are a society that is kind of obsessed with comfort, right? Comfort food. We have creature comfort. We have a whole language around it. And I think in the United States, there's a really strong pull toward comfort. I mean, look at lazy boy recliners. Since the 1970s, it's like my uncle had a lazy boy recliner with a cooler built into it, so he could have his beer cold, like at it. So basically, what I'm saying is, as long as I stay comfortable, nothing changes, right? And we know all the cliches. Life begins at the end of the comfort zone. But right now, what's happening is, boom, we're welcome to discomfort. Temple and I, we have an oath as ministers, and part of that oath is to comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. And right now, I think, I'll speak for myself, but my job is to disturb the comfortable, starting with me. I need to look at my own discomfort, because I have like, oh, I want to go back to when it was more comfortable. I miss my work. I miss my connections. I miss, life isn't that certain, right? And so we have what we call consciousness, human consciousness. And here's what I see. This is what I call reality. But there's this whole all these infinite possibilities. When I am comfortable, I stay in one place. Discomfort gives us an opportunity. One thing I want to say that I think is really important, because a lot of people are saying, this is all happening so we can change. This is all happening for transformation. But I want to make a really clear point. It doesn't mean we're going to change unless we take the opportunity, right? Right now, things are falling apart, or appear to be falling apart, but that doesn't mean we automatically transform. For any of us who have been in addiction, how many times did it get really bad and you're like, oh, finally got bad enough, I'm going to change. 48 hours later, it's very tempting to go back to comfort. And when we're in the conversation of racial inequality, right now, this is explosive, and people are taking a look. People are exploring how we can start to shift. But in 72 hours, do we forget about this? In 1 week, do we forget about this? That's the message I want to give to everyone. Yes, there's an opportunity for great change right now, but we're the ones that have to step through that doorway. It is not going to happen automatically. It is important for us to take this as an opportunity.
Yeah, and it really, such a big part of it is the illusion of control. And, it's very difficult to pursue being a mystic when you need to be in control of what the week's going to look like, So it's the common sense around that. That is one part of it. And when we are ultra stressed, as we are as a culture right now, and we need to be in the throes of racism. We need to be in the throes of white privilege. We need to be in the throes of, we do not want to reflect a nation that has considers white people on one side and black on the other. And all, we don't want to be a part of that. We all understand on a deeper level why some of this has come before to the forefront, because we had 8 years of black president, and that, those unresolved emotions and hatred around that, and that happened for those people that still want slavery and craziness. We can understand the emotional bodies of those certain things, but when it comes to us as people, when we're feeling that we're overstressed, and it could be good stress, I'm so happy this is happening. I'm thrilled that this is happening. I'm thrilled that people have had a timeout. I'm not thrilled that anybody has died, because I'm an advocate for life, but I'm thrilled that of these things that have happened. But if we go through phases that we feel like, wow, I don't know, and how much more can I take? That's when we are catching ourselves that we're over generalizing things. Of the 32 things that we have in our lives that we can bring to our awareness, there's 4 of them that are just not working. Do you know what I mean? And so then we start putting it back into a perspective again. Like, well, wait a minute. If there's 32 things in my life that I would say are my key focuses, and there's 4 of them that are like really out there. But the other 28, I've got a pretty good grip on. Not to control, but I have an understanding of it. I have a sense of who I am in it. And the key with this COVID thing is that people don't just go back to the old way. It's like we say, God is not a Maytag repairman. So if people will not be so determined, I want to get it back just like the way, I don't want to get any of it back the way it used to be, because I want to see what it will be, and what it can be. So if that helps at all.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you both so much. As we're getting close to time here, so I'm wondering if there's, Temple, any resources or anything that you've got coming up that we can share with people right now, anybody that's watching?
Well, I've got a brand new website, templehays.com. Just launched it like 2 weeks ago. And it also includes my new work that I've been delving into the last year and a half. It also has stuff like you were asking me about, and it's the Institute, ILI, the Institute for Leadership and Lifelong Learning International. And it talks about the aspects of who we are and our humanity, and one of them is the Enlightened Rebel. So you could go on and download the prospectus and just read it, at no cost. So that's one thing. The TJ, are you in the Unity book about Worthy? Did you get featured in that?
No.
Okay, well, you ought to have been. Anyway, as we're celebrating Gay Pride, you can go on firstunity.org/free gift and download the magazine Worthy, written by several spiritual leaders that are gay, trans, different sexual orientation. So that's another thing. And I understand we have a happy birthday in the house.
That's right.
That's true.
Hello.
Yeah,
You're
TJ, what year is this, TJ?
Well, I'm just really grateful to be celebrating 34 years of sobriety today. And
oh, I love it. Happy real birthday is what I call it. Happy real birthday. I'm 1 year behind you. You're 34 and I'm 33. Woohoo!
Awesome.
Amazing. What a gift, right? What a gift.
Yeah.
It was the beginning for me of a very long and beautiful spiritual journey. I got sober in 1986. I discovered New Thought in 1988. And that just took what I was starting to work on, in my individual counseling and recovery, and just accelerated it when I walked into Unity. And then just that exploration. It's interesting because the way I found Unity was through the daily word, and I used to read it at my house, and I was like, wow, this is cool. This is wow, what if you're whole and perfect? What if underneath all of this, I'm a precious being? And I want to acknowledge a human being, a spiritual being, Mary Helen Brownell. She was so influential in my life. She made her transition in 1998. She was this beautiful Southern woman, and when I got sober, I met her, and she'd been a counselor, and she'd counseled back then mostly men coming back from the war, and sat with person after person, helping them rekindle the relationship with their true nature. And she used to say to me in her beautiful Southern accent, "Darling, you're so precious." And it took me a good year to start to take that in. So that's what I want to say, is that the greatest gift that I've received in the 34 years of my recovery is I know that to be true about me and every other living being. And I didn't know that was possible. I didn't even imagine that I could come to a place. Temple, I'm with you. In my 20s, I wanted spirituality to be a plateau where I no longer had anything that looked human. And what I'm grateful for now is, in the midst of all my sadness, anger, upset, confusion, there is this place where I recognize the preciousness of my own life and all others. So really
Yes.
grateful. Thank you both.
Yes. Well, I just want to say again how grateful I am that the two of you include me. And I'm very grateful that you include me in this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you guys both so much. I love being in conversation with the two of you. I've looked forward to this talk since the last one.
Yeah, me
And I'm
too.
like, okay, I got to remember all these questions for when
Yeah.
Temple's on the show, you know?
Well, you're a great facilitator and just a beautiful human being. You're just something else.
Well, thank you, Temple. Thank you, TJ. And to everybody watching, thank you very much for joining us. And yeah, we'll schedule another one of these and we'll share it with everybody, and we'll get back at it in a week or something.
Yeah, and for all of you tuning in, if you are moved by our show, just click share. It's that easy. You don't even have to write a comment. It will speak for itself.
Awesome. Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.